Hi, this is Marina from Dark Star Astrology, and I decided to do a video on Ceres, the dark goddess Ceres, and also Pluto and Persephone. Actually, really, Persephone is Eris as well. So it's the three dark planets that are connected with each other, and also because they're very much to do with the whole kind of narcissistic personality disorder that I've suddenly got very interested in, and also people seem to be quite fascinated by it as well. So what I thought is I'd get an old post of mine that was very, very detailed, and I'm just going to kind of read it out. And also this is a bit of a challenge for me because I'm not used to doing videos of me on camera, so this is also going to be a new thing. And people said, you'll get more views if I'm on camera more. But the thing is, it involves a lot of editing because I'm probably going to make mistakes. And I'm not actually that confident on camera. So we'll see. Okay, all right, let's go for it then. So I wrote this post, and basically the dark goddess Ceres was discovered in Sicily, which is where I'm from as well, so there's a strange connection, in 1801. So the new planet was named after the Roman Greek grain goddess because of her close mythological and cult connections to this island. Enna in Sicily was said to be where Proserpina was abducted by Pluto, who apparently flew out of the volcano Mount Etna. Now, when Ceres was discovered, she was exactly, and I mean exactly, in alignment with fixed star Algol, the notorious fixed star Algol, which is Medusa's head, by 0 degrees 00. Now, the Algol connection with Ceres is all the stranger because Medusa's head is also found on the Sicilian flag. They have mixed Ceres symbolism with Medusa by intertwining the snakes with sprigs of wheat. Therefore, there must be some esoteric connection between Medusa and Ceres, but later we will see that the snake symbolism again, we'll see the snake symbolism again with the stars that are involved in Ceres' discovery chart. So Ceres was discovered at 8 p.m. on the very first day of the 19th century. And for 50 years, Ceres was actually classified as the 8th planet until the rest of the asteroids started to be discovered in 1851. Ceres' themes are far more complex than simply Mother Earth. So remember that Ceres comes between Mars and Jupiter, so it's not really a personal planet, nor is it just another mummy moon. Another problem with the grain goddess brand is that it seems very one-dimensional. I mean, it's bread, right? So how complex can buns get? You cannot look at Ceres in isolation because she really comes in a trio with Pluto and Eris, both mythologically and in the story of her reclassification as a dwarf planet. But I will come back to the simplicity of the Earth Mother because it is so simple, and obviously we can overlook its importance. So Ceres is not just a sun-kissed golden field of corn. In fact, this being Dark Star, of course we must look at Ceres' dark shadow. The Persephone myth is integral to Ceres' meaning, as Robert Graves believes Persephone is the younger self of Demeter. Now, before Persephone's abduction, she was the maiden virgin core, and after her abduction, she was named Persephone. In terms of astrology, we can say that Ceres could signify the maiden Persephone and Eris, the post-abducted Persephone. We could also play around with the triple goddess and say that I put this little list, and it's Ceres stroke core is the maiden, the virgin. Eris stroke Persephone is the saviour, mother, or maiden, the saviour, maiden, or mother. And then Pluto Ceres is the crone. So she is about natural law and the cycles of life. So the three dwarf planets really are a transformation based on the seasonal changes. The mourning that Ceres suffered at the loss of her daughter Persephone, or her own childhood virginity is mirrored in the infertile winter season. Hades for the Greeks was also the god of riches, and deep in the underworld we find gold if we dig deep enough. Now, opium poppies are associated with Ceres, as Persephone was said to be picking them in a field when she was raped. Her blood-red stains in the blazing field of gold signify the breaking of the hymen during the first act of sex, but they're also the start of menstruation for the blossoming young woman. We have to look at the myth in context with the times. In ancient Greece, sometimes when a couple wanted to marry, but their parents wouldn't allow it, the suitor would kidnap his beloved and they would spend the night out in the country somewhere. After that, it was assumed that the virgin had been deflowered and they would now have to marry in order to save the girl's honour. On a personal note, this happened in Sicily too, where my grandmother, aged just 15, eloped with my granddad, who was, I think, in his 20s, I believe. So, you know, my dad was the result of that union, actually. So it was quite a quaint story, but by today's standards, my granddad would have been considered a paedophile. So that's, you know, something to think about, really. Now, 100 years ago, though, women were probably more mature by the age of 15, as life expectancy was a lot shorter. Women became parents earlier and therefore learned responsibility earlier as well. Now, teenage abduction may not have been such a shocker in the past because Sicily was under Muslim rule, remember, for a good 500 years, and Muhammad had a 9-year-old wife, so this mentality might have rubbed off on the Sicilians as well. The earlier you get the girl, the better she is groomed into the obedient slave characteristics of the Ceres-Pluto relationship. It's important to understand that some of the culture behind Ceres, as she really is a product of the front line where the East meets the West. And Ceres' cosmic birth in Sicily means she must have absorbed some of the frontline edgy culture. So the dark side of Ceres brings themes of abuse, rape, abduction, and in the very worst cases, paedophilia. There is very definitely a Svengali influence too, seen in the young singers in the entertainment industry like Miley Cyrus or Britney Spears. Now, these starlets were groomed from a very young age by their Hollywood handlers or producers, and these producers will be Pluto, while Ceres can be the stage mother or the daughter herself. To make things more complex, there's another Greek god named Plutus or Plautos, meaning the Greek word, it's the Greek word for wealth, who was actually the son of Demeter. So Plautos was also the son of Demeter. So it does get very incestuous and a bit confusing here. So this represents the aspect of Ceres that was extremely materialistic. For in Dante's Inferno, it states that Plautus is the demon of wealth who guards the fourth circle of hell. The hoarders and the wasters symbolize the evil of hoarding wealth. So there's a lot of bleed between Ceres and daughter Persephone. The confusion also occurs with Hades, Pluto, and Plautus. So Hades' mother-in-law, Ceres, has a son, Plautus, who is also an aspect of Hades himself. This complicated scenario really mirrors the phenomenon of enmeshment found in narcissistic personality disorder. Narcissistic parents often create triangulation between the siblings. So one child will be designated the golden child, while another the scapegoat. Persephone shows all the symptoms of being the scapegoat, while her half-brother Plautus' wealth is certainly the golden child. And of course, these roles can flip around now and again as well, just to keep the children on their toes. Persephone may start off as the golden child in the shape of core until she is still, while she's still very attached to her mother, but then Core is groomed into the little star, mirror of her mother's unfulfilled fantasies of fame. And this is a lot to live up to. And if Core Persephone fails, then she becomes the scapegoat. Persephone can also become scapegoat by pairing with bad boy Pluto. The Plautus sibling can be the golden child by being Ceres' substitute husband, as her real husband has failed in some way or has left home. And this, of course, is a very incestuous type of relationship. Either way, this negative Ceres is engulfing her children and becomes the devouring mother. So here's the sort of dark triad as well. Now, so we get a reminder: Ceres, Eris, who is Persephone really, and Pluto. In psychology, some of the cluster B personality disorders are grouped together called the dark triad. They comprise Narcissism, Machiavelianism, and Psychopathy. And these mirror quite well the negative manifestations of Ceres, Eris as Persephone, and Pluto. So then we get negative Ceres, who is Narcissism. As defined by Wikipedia, it means grandiosity, pride, egotism, and a lack of empathy. But there is also covert narcissism, which is a lot more subtle, and that plays the kind of victim role. Now, negative Eris will be, Machiavellianism, which will be manipulation and exploitation of others, and a cynical disregard for morality, and a focus on self-interest and deception. And then negative Pluto will be psychopathy, which is enduring antisocial behavior, impulsivity, selfishness, callousness, and remorselessness. So being brought up by a narcissistic mother can force the young scapegoat Eris Persephone to become Machiavellian just in order to survive. And Eris can feel so unloved that she resorts to manipulation in order to gain the love that she does not believe will be given unconditionally. But there are overlaps between innocent Ceres as Core and Persephone as Eris as well. So the way out of this character malfunction as a result of negative Ceres emotional abandonment is often does come in the shape of an abduction by Pluto. And this forces Persephone to see her dark side and accept that she's been abused by her own parents. In this way, she goes into the dark night of the soul and starts to remember her shattered ego. Her journey to the underworld and back shows this transformation. Okay, I'm back. I had to get a cup of tea because I got a bit of a sore throat and I need the honey. So, okay. So let's get on with this. Now, the next part is, it's titled Narcotics and the Caveman. So when negative Ceres experiences the loss of her narcissistic supply from her daughter, she becomes distraught. Like the myth, she withdraws her material support, maternal material, interesting, the abundance of nature's bounty, and falls into a winter of depression. Her massive pride is hurt. How could Persephone leave her for that bad Pluto boy? Another association with Ceres is the poppy. So Ceres may take to numbing her pain by taking narcotics. Note that the etymology Narcissism, narcotics, is interesting to say the least, and also narkotos, the Greek verbal adjective of narkoun, to numb and to make unconscious as well. So I know this all looks very bleak, but Ceres rules cycles and all is not lost here. The mourning period is just a stage. All mothers go through this stage when their children leave home, and also when they go through the menopause themselves. So Ceres can describe that stage of a woman's life as well. A man will experience Ceres through his relationship with his mother or rubbing up against feminists. It might also manifest as the typical mother-in-law problem as well, where the mother Ceres feels threatened by the son's new wife. Again, the risk of triangulation comes into play, where the wife is seen as being manipulative and seducing the son away from loyalty to the mother Ceres. Men can have addiction problems too, obviously, which can bring problems of zoning out with pornography, video games, as well as the pain numbing chemicals. Men have a natural need, however, to quietly contemplate. As primitives, they would go into their caves, the modern day shed, or chop wood, or stare into the fire, the modern day barbecue. So they are naturally more inclined to be hypnotized by the computer screen. Ceres in the modern world suffers at the loss of sacred pagan rituals that connected her to the land. Positive Ceres is the herbalist, the farmer, the magical cook, the nurse, and the healer who feeds and nurtures her family. This is a very traditional female role, and if she ends up stuck in an office, then she becomes over materialistic. The gold grain of the earth, which is grana in Italian, another word, which is another word for cash in Italian as well, grana, becomes replaced by gold coins or jewellery. The magic of the pentagram becomes instead a craving for pentacles. So you can see this very clearly in the tarot cards and the elements, where pentacles are associated with earth signs and the material world. Earth signs are also the ones most connected to the earth spirit and are the original pagans. When the Abrahamic monotheistic religions swept across pagan Europe, they replaced the worship of earth deities with what are basically alien sky gods. The original material world was looked down upon, and as women were deemed closer to nature, they were also seen as lesser or more animalistic beings as well. So what this means for our Earth Mother Ceres is that she's being despiritualized, and it is dispiriting to feel less worthy than your male counterparts. Self-worth plays a huge part in whether a person becomes narcissistic or not, and Ceres resonates quite strongly with the second house of self-worth as well. The house also rules the direct fruit of one's labour and one's personal money. And opposite the 8th house, Pluto is associated with other people's money, debt and usury. So sorcery also belongs in the 8th, which means fake money and credit, through which fake money and credit are also created. And this, of course, keeps workers in bondage as their labour is taxed. So the 8th house money is parasitical because it makes money from money rather than talent, skills or labour that the second house, house of money does. So second house workers, artisans are literally being vamped. How this relates back to Ceres is the notion of narcissistic supply. So when Ceres cannot be energized by the sacred earth, she will feel drained, like she is dying. This is when she will resort to fake energy harvesting, that is actually retail therapy. Does that make sense? Yeah, anyway. So then we get the parasitical plutocrats. Plutocrats love to destroy national culture and identity. Now, this is when I started to get into the whole nationalistic thing, when I started writing this post as well. Plutos love to destroy national and cultural identity, which ultimately comes from the land that we live on, because that way we resort to identifying with consumer brands instead. So you become a Hollister person or a Prada or a North Face or a Mac person. Your car says who you are, not the fact that you're Welsh or Texan or Cockney or Parisian, etc. And, note these are westernized areas that I use because most other ethnic groups have their religion as a unifying sense of oneness and strength. We have lost this in the West thanks to globalism And this has been a deliberate strategy. One thing that I think does unify us in the West is our love of nature and animals, which is all very Ceres. Even when we are forced into the cities, we just love our pets. So our cats sleep with us. And there's that ritual of walking dogs to the park as well, in the park. We love our gardens and window boxes too. Ceres campaigns against cruelty, animal cruelty, and tries her best to be eco-friendly. And these are her positive traits. Now, the negative side of Ceres comes up due to the degeneracy of morality in culture generally. According to numerous studies, says Wikipedia, men, and what's more, Caucasian men, are supposed to show high levels of the dark triad traits. But I think this is extremely misleading, as surely the deviousness of these traits would actually not show up in tests. So, I'm questioning that. The most honest victim of a abuser will have probably picked up the dark triad virus. And these victims are more likely to test positive because they come to believe that they are selfish, manipulating, self-obsessed. And this is, of course, the result of being raised by an abusive parent. The scapegoat child often has all these dark triad traits projected onto them by the whole dysfunctional family. So they grow up believing they are the dirty, evil people and incapable of loving another. This is because the so-called or so branded narcissistic child is constantly told that they're not devoted enough to the evil parent. And that same goes for a relationship with a dark Pluto dark Cupid as well, who wants total admiration, but nothing Persephone does is ever good enough. These are the toxic vampire relationships I talk about in my Dark Cupid post. And I'll do, I think, a YouTube about that as well. Any attempt for Ceres types to be true to themselves is seen as a betrayal from Pluto, which then forces them to piece together a very fragile ego in secret. Now, recent studies of narcissism between the sexes show that men still outrank women, but the figures for women are rising extremely fast, so that the gap has shrunk considerably now. Now, what can we make of this? It seems that the dark triad is simply a product of so-called modern life, its disconnection and its pressure on women to be as productive financially as men. As more women become educated, they're basically picking up the dark triad virus, and figures show that the more educated a woman is, the less children she's likely to have. But the risk-taking element in the dark triad is also what gives men their drive and inventiveness, which is why men have more of the symptoms. Now, again, I've done some more research since I wrote this post, which was actually quite a long time ago now. I think it was about 3 years ago. The reason that it's harder to spot, I think, in women is because they are more likely to be the covert narcissists. And the more that I've heard about those, they are like... They seem to be the flip coin of the overt narcissist. But I think they're becoming more overt now. I think this is what's happening. Because you see the inverted kind of narcissist, the covert one, are more likely to play the victim. And they're more likely to be the sort of Neptunian as well. But anyway, back to the post. Ceres is about balance, really, and usually the Pluto males are reined in by the grounding action of their Ceres wife. If that balance is upset and the Ceres wife also becomes Plutonic, then the balance tips towards a Pluto overdose, and therefore we do start seeing more psychopathy in society. So Ceres, the goddess of fertility, shines brightest in the role of the primary caregiver. And this naturally falls to the female since she is the gateway of life. Now, while researching the dark triad, I came across the correlation of matching fast mating strategy with the likelihood of having dark triad traits. There was an article called "I Just Can't Control Myself: The Dark Triad and Self-Control," shows where tests were conducted, and not surprisingly, it was found that psychopathy, which is Pluto, showed all the symptoms of the fast mating strategy. So to understand this better, look up RK theory on the web. But basically, the R rating strategy is fast, which is a promiscuous lifestyle, many partners, many children, high sex drive, low willpower, low investment parenting and risk taking, and also instant gratification. Now, the K strategy is a slow life strategy, which is late sexual maturity, less partners, small family, high investment parenting, planning for the future, high self-control, but a lower sex drive. But it's mostly not either or. Most people will fall on a spectrum between R and K. They say that the R is more like sort of rabbits, and the K is more like wolves. Yeah, so this thing about narcissism did not show for the kind of rabbit R strategy at all. And it's quite the opposite strategy to Pluto, because Ceres is at heart a classic, slow, kind of ultra-conservative. So the rape of Ceres core by the plutocracy could be what is producing the unnatural state of narcissism in the world today. This is my theory anyway. So Ceres is not allowed to be natural anymore, as society is basically generating towards the fast rabbit mating strategy. And you could see this all over the media, but especially in pop music, which is aimed at the young. Now, the archetype of Ceres has not fared well under free love and the pill. The ripping apart of extended families has left Ceres shattered and undervalued. Chastity, morality, and decency are ridiculed. Well, if you have an unbridled sex drive, then it serves you to make your sexual prey feel like silly little prudes, doesn't it, really? So belittling is a very powerful weapon, as is the pressure to fit in with your peers. So, the kind of thing where everyone says, everyone else is putting out, what's wrong with you? Are you gay or frigid or some kind of weird religious freak? A Persephone who's been groomed not to set boundaries by an engulfing Ceres type of a parent becomes easy prey for the fast Pluto predator. But it's not just behavioural pressure from the plutocracy. There's also a psychological pressure to keep your disapproval of bad behaviour to yourself. So one must never call a woman a slut for sleeping around or judge single mothers, because we're all equal these days. Women can be just as fast Pluto types as men, even though the figures for cervical cancer show that women suffer far more from having multiple sexual partners than men do. Ceres suffers because no matter what she does, she will get emotionally attached to a male just by having sex with him. Ceres women who say they can take it or leave it repeatedly run the risk of disconnecting and numbing their heart center and thus becoming the negative Ceres. Maybe Venus can do that kind of thing successfully. Venus is the courtesan after all, but never Ceres. The naturally conservative K Ceres takes things slowly and naturally. Force her into promiscuity and she will feel her temple has been defiled. She will hate herself. In terms of the Persephone myth, though, and the relationship between the three dwarf planets, they do connect symbolically with the Anunnaki myth. And if some terrible tragedy did hit Earth and we are matter of the body of this Earth, then somewhere in our genetic memory, we will have the trauma buried as an archetype, as above, so below. So when humanity started to remember, new discoveries in the cosmos happen. Whether fact or fiction, the myths seem to correspond with what I've been finding in my work with my clients. People who have Ceres in hard aspect to the ascendant, to the sun or the moon, will have darker Ceres themes play out in their lives. These folk might find studying mythology particularly fulfilling, especially the Greco-Roman goddesses that comprise the asteroid belt. It may help them piece together lost parts of their life that they have been disconnected from. So remembering. Now, it may also help us, when I say them, it's really all of us, I think, to avoid the classic reactions to having suffered narcissistic abuse. And that is fight, which is Mars, flight, which is Jupiter, freeze, which is Saturn, or fawn, which is Venus. My theory is really, if Ceres is in hard aspects to these planets, then these might be the symptoms that you have from narcissistic abuse. And I would also add another to those reactions, which would be far out. And that would be akin to spiritual bypassing, where any religion or spiritual practice is also used as an escape from narcissistic abuse as well. And this usually includes New Age type beliefs. So for that, I would put Neptune in there. And that would also include the abuse of sacred herbs as well. So maybe, far out could be a mix of flight and freeze as well, though. So one of the YouTubers that I started to follow in the beginning about narcissism is Spartan Life Coach. He's interesting because he had a dark Cupid type relationship with a woman, so his narcissistic abuse came from a woman, and it's good to hear it from a man talking about a woman, because nearly all of the ones on the internet are women talking about men as the narcissistic abusers. So it's good to hear it, the male perspective. So what he came out with was the fact that you can become a scapegoat, and that is, he did a really good video called Shamans, Black Sheep, Seers and Weirdos, which is what happens to you if you are in receipt of narcissistic abuse. So one of those gifts that scapegoats or Ceres scapegoats develop is a heightened intuition and precognition as a result of having to second guess their abuser's actions. Now, this is a defense strategy as well. And also, Ceres makes a fantastic nurse because they are so used to putting the parent first and having to constantly read their emotions, so that, their empathy is really huge as well. But the problem with having not discovered strong boundaries, however, means that Ceres absorbs the mood of everyone around them. And they also make great counselors too, of course, but they do need to develop a strong Saturn psychic shield, or they will soon get drained and suffer burnout. And I realise it can be confusing that sometimes Ceres will operate as the abusive parent, and other times Ceres will be the scapegoat and even the golden child. So you need to look at the whole chart, to sort of ascertain who's who. But you can kind of tell. I mean, this is the whole point of the dark triad. They can easily morph into each other, and then it gets kind of confusing. And then sometimes you take it in turns being all of them at some point. So inheritance is also one of the themes of Ceres, and what one passes down to the next generation motivates one's life, whether it be heroic family traits, talents, property, or wealth. Sometimes the crisis experienced in childhood can become a creative spur to be excellent in a given field as well. And the cerebellum in the back of the brain governs balance and involuntary body movements. So Ceres Chiron connections turn up a lot in yoga teachers. They've got the mind-body balance, while Ceres Lilith seems to show up in herbalists and pagan witches. So, that kind of sums up the Ceres child. Also, I think Ceres Neptune would also be kind of herbalists as well. So let's look at the discovery chart for Ceres, because I think it's very, very striking. So we got sensible, earthy, and responsible. Saturn is rising. So straight away we have the themes of protection and parental responsibility. And it's absolutely highlighted by that tight square from Ceres to Saturn. There can be a fear of letting go of the material world and one's possessions, and that includes one's children. Remember, Saturn even ate his in myth. So both Ceres and Saturn have the scythe as their glyph too, which may represent the severing of the umbilical cord as well as the obvious reaping of the harvest. Anu was the Anunnaki version of Saturn, and Anu was supposed to have given us the ability to farm. So we have a striking yod to Pluto, which is not surprising given the Persephone myth themes that I've already discussed. And traditional family values and respect for the ancestors are Saturn guarding the ascendant. So Saturn is also opposing Venus, so affection is expressed with difficulty. It's a far tougher love and discipline here too, like a matron. There's also magic, practical magic, as Ceres can rule nurses and midwives. And as mentioned previously, the second, 8th house axes resonate with the Persephone myth. A Dionysian Pluto in Pisces is in that Plutonic 8th house, of course, and Virgo core is fitting as the sign in the 2nd house of self-worth. Virgo Pisces can also be a victim and savior as well. So Saturn is on fixed star Alphard, which is in the water snake, and Alphard with Saturn gives strong passions, but cool, cautious and slow to anger, secret and sorrowful love affairs of short duration, domestic disharmony and danger of threat by poison. So the condition of Saturn is really important because it's rising. I'm not going to look at the AC, the rising star for the ascendant, because we're not 100% about the time, but around 8 p.m. would certainly have Saturn within range of the rising with the ascendant. So I think Saturn on Alphard is important because it shows the danger of addiction problems, particularly within the vampiric toxic relationships, and with also painkilling drugs such as opiates as well. Now, Saturn with Alphard, according to the Ebertins, the astrologers, they say it's poisoned hatred in women, gas poisoning, and that can be gaslighting as well, which is common in narcissistic relationships, danger to life by wrong use of drugs and overindulgence of good living, smoke inhalation and danger of suffocation as well. Suffocation, I mean, that's the engulfing, devouring mother as well. A poisoning is also possible in a relationship between man and woman in marriage, of course. And this is in the quote from Ebertins. So for me, the poisoning hatred could also be a jealous, narcissistic mother or mother-in-law. But there is hope because the chart ruler is the sun, which is in mutual reception with Saturn. And this is the sort of leadership that is benign, wise and paternal. Patriarchy is not always bad, not in that sense anyway. So in nature, the male animal is king, and that's worked for millions of years. Don't mention seahorses. I know there are exceptions, but in general, it makes sense that the woman shouldn't be out fighting with all its attending risks of injury, when preserve the eggs, So the next generation and the survival of the tribe depend upon the mother's safety and health as well. So bearing all this unfashionable traditional talk in mind, Mercury is on Ras Al Hague in Ophiuchus, which is unpopular attitude and criticism through religion, philosophy, or science, difficulties in marriage and quarrels fostered by others, trouble through opposite sex, and not very good for gain. So these days, it is traditional family values that are regarded as old hat and scoffed at by progressives who want to deny biology. But Ceres says, how can you improve on nature? The boom of organic products and the fight against GMO at least confirms that. Ras Al Khaimah is found in Ophiuchus as the snake charmer, which can be seen as the Lilith constellation. And Lilith will always have trouble submitting in relationships. But in this chart, she's on powerful patriarch Betelgeuse, making her a natural leader over other women and a patriotic queen to her king. Ceres is also fantastic organising mothers' groups or even some sort of terribly old-fashioned women's institute. Ceres then, at her best, can be Florence Nightingale tending to men in battle. Ceres is the strong feminine woman who isn't a feminist. The main theme is defending the homestead and supporting the men who do that too. And if she channels her energy this way, then she will dilute the tendency to smother and possess her children or creations. But she must also learn to let her man wear the trousers, or the emasculating Gorgon star of Algol can take effect. Sun on Vega in the Lyra gives artistic talent, and Ceres is fertile with ideas. Vega is said to pave the way to riches and fame. However, if other influences play a part, this wealth may be lost again. And the trine to Mars gives the pushy stage mother. Mars on the midheaven makes her confrontational out in the world. The Venus square Neptune will have romantic notions of what love should be. Yes, you shall marry a handsome prince, my child, but not the Prince of Darkness. The polarity between Ceres and Pluto will always play out if Ceres tries to cling to her children too hard, but maybe this conflict is needed. And I don't know where this quote comes from, but I think it really sums up Ceres and the Pluto polarity quite well. The threat of death is what makes life so sweet. So what I want to do in the next part 2 of the Ceres explanation and the dark triad is look at how this works in practice between a mother and a grandmother, a mother and a daughter, and also the golden child. And I have a very personal example to give. I'm not sure whether I should give it or not, but people seem to like the moon video where I talked a little bit about my own background. So I think I'm going to do mine. And since also today was a day where I had a gaslighting in the extreme from my narky woman. So I might even show that as well. So yeah. Okay then, I think that brings me to the end. I know this was a very long one, and bear with me with this. I'm not very used to reading and then looking at the camera as well. So that there's probably going to be a lot of editing, but I want to get better at it because I've been told that, that's what people kind of like on YouTube as well. So thanks for listening, and for other material on the dark goddesses, including Lilith and also Sedna as well, come to darkstarrastrology.com. Thanks for listening. All the best. Bye-bye.